Welcome to the Classical Commons podcast, conversational podcast. We're exploring here the ideas, the people, and some of the trends in classical education. And I'm Rob Jackson, the founder of this digital platform. We aim to connect classical school communities nationwide to the talent they need and the resources they so desperately want. Today's guests are colleagues and friends and partners of Classical Commons. One's a former student. Both are now working with classical schools and individuals to promote the essential ingredient for any true renaissance, a return to the sources. Welcome, Jonathan and Ryan.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thanks for having
me. Thanks,
me.
Dr. J. Yeah, excited to be here.
So good to have you. It's been a few years, more than a dozen, since I heard someone refer to me as Dr. J. So for our audience, back when I was teaching at the college level, I knew Jonathan Roberts here, and he picked up that moniker and has used it and apparently spread it around. So I'm glad to hear that it's got a little mileage left in it. Thanks, J. Rob.
It's here to stay.
It is.
I hope it's okay that I've grafted myself into that tradition.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I'm really pleased, actually, Ryan, to have you with us, because it seems to me that what has happened with this project that you and Jonathan have helped to launch is that Jonathan's skill, which I witnessed grow and develop long after he left my classroom, as a teacher, as a tutor, as a language tutor, and now an up-and-coming entrepreneur, it seems like, Ryan, you all have just made quite a match as it relates to building something, as I said, that goes back to sources. So I really want to hear from both of you. How did you get interested in classical education? Let's start with you, Ryan, and then we'll jump back to J-Rob. Jonathan.
Sure. I think that makes sense, because really my interest and introduction to classical ed comes through him pretty directly. So I got interested, do the long biography short. I got interested in language learning in middle school. I had this fantastic French teacher, Madame Charukina, who's this 5-foot Japanese Hawaiian woman, who she was pretty strict, but she let us get away with anything so long as we were speaking in French. And so it was all these middle school kids who actually learned to speak French really well in our public middle school. And that kind of alerted me to the fact I liked languages. And fast forward quite a bit, and I was thinking about grad school and thinking about the kind of skills I might need. And I ended up getting connected to Jonathan because I thought, well, if I am going to go read medieval French literature in grad school, which I never ended up doing, I'll need to know Latin. And so someone introduced me to Jonathan, and we started from the beginning. Chapter 1 of Lingua Latina, Familia Romana, Roma in Italia est. And from there, he guided me through, basically all of Latin grammar and quite a bit of vocab, reading, writing. And it was from that relationship that we built that we ended up starting the Ancient Language Institute and came into contact with classical ed. But that's not stuff I knew until I started doing this with him.
Very good. Well, Jonathan, how about your own journey?
Yeah, so over a decade ago, that's a sentence to make one feel old, I was at this little college and was taking these great courses on the history and philosophy of education. And one of the things that we were reading was this Richard Gamble text, and there were constant references on the importance of studying Latin. And this is a course for those who haven't been keeping track that our own Dr. J was teaching, and so all of these great authors talking about the importance of studying Latin, you should be studying Latin, and this is how you should be learning it. And I was so kind of perplexed, just well, why haven't I studied Latin? What went wrong? And so I promptly signed up and took Latin as soon as I could. But that also got me thinking, who is teaching Latin? Is this even happening? And so then that created a category for me as I was looking at different institutions, different schools. And so I came to learn, there's this whole classical education movement. And then I came to recognize that some of my fellow undergrads had gone to classical schools. And so that's kind of how I became acquainted with the whole movement and became a fan, one might say.
Indeed, indeed. Well, language instruction. I mean, that's really what we want to talk about today, because your project, which we'll get into in more detail here shortly, is all about bringing the ancient languages really to the contemporary scene. But they've come in for a good bit of criticism. I mean, we've all heard it, dead languages, right? So there's no consequence for us among the living. They're irrelevant, right, for a modern education, or unnecessary because we have Google Translate and so forth. But what do you all make of these criticisms, right, as they've been leveled against the instruction, the teaching, the learning of ancient languages?
I think ultimately they kind of don't matter, and they kind of don't stand, because there's tons of people that want to learn these languages. I think that the critics need to ask themselves, well, why?
Yeah,
Why
that
do
is a good
all
question, right?
people want to learn Latin and Greek? Like, from their perspective, that seems like that's an unanswerable question, because they've said, well, there's no point.
Yeah.
Well, why are all these people doing it? And the reason why they're doing it is because there's gold in them hills. There's so much, wisdom and beauty and artistry that you can only find in these languages.
Yeah.
That's one quick answer to that.
And is it true? Is that, Ryan, sorry, go ahead. I want to hear kind of your gut, because you were describing going to grad school, or the prospect of grad school. So you were just sort of preparing yourself for the next stage, right? But now that you're working with ALI and building this, what are you hearing? What's driving them, right, to the languages?
Yeah, I think Jonathan's right, and that there's been various answers made, and so that Richard Gamble anthology you guys were talking about highlights a lot of different answers, but they all ultimately fall along similar lines, that these languages give you access to literature, and that literature really does contain gold. And yeah, one of the texts that we always come back to is Cicero's Proarchia Poeta, and this was kind of the manifesto of the Renaissance humanists, who brought good Latin kind of back to Europe after it having been gone for centuries. And Cicero is talking about the study of Greek and Latin and the authors and the languages. And he says, look, there's lots of great men who've lived, and they had good natures, and they didn't need a liberal arts education in order to get that. But there are all these other great men who had good natures, yes, but those good natures were refined and brought to a higher pitch because of their study of ancient literature. And inside that study of ancient literature is necessarily the study of the languages. And so it's ultimately an education for greatness, in greatness and for greatness. And it's like Google Translate isn't greatness. This is just kind of a tool.
Sure. It's interesting because we have recently, I highlighted an article in our newsletter, Currents, concerning, and this is an MIT-based study concerning those who are using AI to compose their own essays, and comparing the control group being some group that's simply composing on their own terms, right, from whatever they've got inside the gray matter. And the result was that the folks who, sorry, we're getting some feedback. Can y'all hear that? Let's see. Is that you? Okay, sorry.
That ended
It's
it.
better.
Whatever.
That's better. Good. The study suggested that for those who are using the AI generated accompaniment or complement to their writing, they're not actually remembering anything. They couldn't really recall their own arguments because they had sort of assembled them on the fly, just giving them kind of cutting and pasting what AI had proffered. Whereas those who had composed had to undertake invention and arrangement and, sort of these canons of rhetoric. And I assume something similar or comparable is happening when we learn the languages, right? The original languages from which the ideas are produced, as opposed to through mediated, translations and so forth. But I want us to take a little bit of time, because of the distinct quality and really the remarkable reception that you all have had, to understand your approach. My understanding from what you've shared with me is that you've got a pretty distinct approach that really would be different from what we see in much of the existing apps for language learning. There's a standard, right, that I've put up on the screen for those who are just listening to this. We're looking at a Duolingo cover page, or perhaps we talk to the experts in language learning over at Rosetta Stone. I was disappointed when I looked at the cover page of Babbel. They don't even have Latin, let alone Greek. So tell us a little bit about what really does distinguish Ancient Language Institute's approach to the learning of these languages.
Can we start by looking at Babbel?
Oh yeah, sure. If you'd like to. There it is.
I've only looked at Babbel a little bit, but my sense, and this is also true to some degree regarding Rosetta Stone and Duolingo, is that they take what I like to call the taco method approach. So the taco method approach is you learn a language so that you can learn how to order tacos. And that's a image of like what you're doing with a language. You're trying to learn how to survive in a little kind of touristy situation.
Yeah.
And a lot of these programs are preparing you for very basic, useful live conversations and situations. They're not preparing you to read literature. I think that you could probably do the Spanish Duolingo for 3 eternities and not be able to read Don Quixote. Would be my guess. Because that's not what it's trying to do. That's not its focus. It's not a literary approach. So that's one big difference between what we're doing at Ancient Language Institute and what these other platforms are doing. Mm-hmm. We are trying to get students up to a point where they can read some of the most challenging texts that exist in that language. So that's at a baseline. That's a big kind of difference in terms of like what are the ends that we're seeking.
And you want to dig in a little bit and explain how it is that your approach, your pedagogy, really does make that possible, the access to great literature, great minds?
Yeah, so we take what we sometimes call the mixed method approach, where students have to do a number of things in order to be successful at learning a language. So one, they have to learn vocabulary. So students start learning vocabulary through images and sounds and example sentences. So they'll see an image of a sword, and then they will hear gladius, and then they'll see an example, and then they can hear it. And so that's going to help them internalize the term. You see it, you hear it, and then you interact with it. Then the next step is you have to understand the principles of the language. You have to internalize the grammar. So students do this with micro examples. So a quick sense as to how that would work. You would see a bunch of examples with in and the ablative, like puer in campo est, puer in edificio est, right? And so you get in plus ablative, you get a lot of examples, then you get an explanation. It's like, this is what's going on, this is how the case system works, this is the ablative, and then you get to do some exercises. So after that, you're ready to do some reading, right? So then you read a story that uses all of these ingredients, and that really helps you learn how to read. You need to read, and you need to start at a low enough level where you can do it successfully. Now that's in terms of like the materials and what students do independently. The other ingredient is what happens in class. Mm-hmm. Because our classes for adults, we meet for an hour and a half once a week. that on its own is not enough to learn the language, right? You need to be spending more than an hour and a half a week in order to make good progress.
Yeah, for sure.
But during that hour and a half, what we want to do is use the language actively. So we want our instructors to be acting like coaches, like telling students what to do, how to compose. It's like, okay, give me a sentence that uses in plus the ablative, right? That's how you would start. And so then students can compose their own sentences. An instructor might ask a question to elicit a response that also uses that construction. And so students, through oral composition, they also kind of internalize the vocabulary and the grammar structures that allow them to maintain what they've studied and make progress. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we approach these languages.
Yeah. It's really quite remarkable the team that you've assembled. I was, before we talk a little bit about how you've brought the right people to the table, as it were. Tell me a little bit more about where you see language pedagogy in America generally. Now, again, you can paint with a broad brush because we're really interested in understanding and distinguishing what you're doing and how this approach is not only, as you put it on the website, effective, it's fast, but it's fun, right? So what's happening typically in language classrooms, maybe a little less typical would be your own experience, Ryan, right? You had a good French teacher and she really captured your imagination and brought you in and had you producing the language. But what's it like in many American language classrooms?
Totally. Yeah. You're getting any feedback from me? I'm unmuted so you can hear me. It's
okay.
All good. Great. I think the typical story is that there's two camps. There's the quote unquote traditional grammar translation world, which is probably more typical. And then there's the natural method, comprehensible input, living language, a lot of jargon camp, which is in the minority. And, these, where the battle lines are and how many are in which camp really varies depending on whether you're doing a modern language. And so you're probably more likely to find people doing these kind of spoken active methodologies for a modern language than for an ancient language. Both those camps are out there, but the real default is treating the language like a code, and is especially prevalent for Latin and the ancient languages, where you're given a vocab list with the English equivalents. Gladius means this, puer means, gladius means sword, puer means boy, and it's just a kind of one-to-one code. And then you read or are lectured to about the ablative. The ablative is this kind of case, and it's used to, and you've forgotten all the vocab by the time you finish reading about the ablative. And then you get a sentence that's really hard that uses the ablative, and it says, translate this into English. And so then language instruction is code breaking. Latin is this cipher, and we've given you the tools to understand it, which can only happen once it becomes an English sentence. So that even if you're successfully translating Cicero, you're really not even reading Cicero. You're
reading your rough translation, right? Of your rough translation of Cicero. You're not really with it. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for some people, I think this is fun and interesting, and those people are going to go on to be code breakers for the National Security Agency, and I wish them well. However, for most people, this isn't going to be easy or fun or fast, and they're mostly going to learn to hate the language. And so some people are kind of shocked and appalled when we talk about speaking in Latin, speaking in ancient Greek, speaking in biblical Hebrew, speaking in Old English. But what we say is speaking in Latin is hard, granted. However, it's actually harder to learn Latin if you're not speaking in Latin. Imagine trying to learn Spanish and not speaking in Spanish. Being you can only read canonical Spanish things. And this task we've set for ourselves, like Jonathan said, is really hard. I mean, it's hard to teach someone English, right? If anybody's done ESL stuff before. This is a lot of work, and it's a lot of work for the student. imagine if you get, this foreign student coming to your school, and it's not like, I need to learn English to, get around and survive socially. It's, I want to learn English so that I can read Faulkner. It's like, ooh, you've got a big task ahead of you. But that's what Latin students, pretty much all Latin students want to do. I really want to read Virgil. I really want to read Apuleius. I really want to read Cicero. It's like, yeah, this is some of the hardest stuff that's ever been written, period.
Yeah. You know what's so interesting about this is that in some sense, your method, and again, it's a method that has been adopted, this living Latin or the living language has been adopted in a couple of different camps, University of Kentucky and elsewhere, that we have some hubs, really some centers of activity like this. But what reminds me of the fact that the learning of a language, a written language, right? As you said, Ryan, to crack the code, ultimately is driven by, is those signs, those symbols are representative of an oral modality, right? Of a spoken modality that we speak first, right? As young children, as babies, right? We're just there cooing and cawing, trying to emulate our mothers, our parents, our caregivers. And eventually we come to that ability to understand the signs and the symbolic nature of a literate form, right? Of the phonography that turns into the orthography. But now what you all are trying to do is essentially both help them understand the orthographic, but then reconstruct and maybe assemble, as it were, some of that oral, that speech, that sort of what they can hear with their inner ear. And not merely, again, the Cracker Jack box with the code that you can, translate the word from the symbolic, cipher. So I think there's something here that just speaks to the very nature of language as a human enterprise. Never mind the very high and exalted end game which you have in mind, which is to read the greats, right? But you want them to have that inner speech, that activity of the mind that really is theirs in the language. So you have found some remarkable people. I'm going to put the screen back up here. I started browsing this in anticipation of our call. And after you describe your approach, I mean, this page goes on and on and on. I think you've got close to 32 of these tutors. Where are you finding these folks? This is amazing. It's like the proverbial unicorn, right? Where are you finding these tutors?
Yeah, great question. It's funny you're on that page. Earlier this morning, before we started taping, I was on that page adding a new person, and so it's not ranked by anything except when we hire them and they send me their headshot. But I'm just over the moon about the people we get to work with, because back in 2019, I was like, side hustle, build a website for my friend Jonathan, and he was teaching Latin to a dozen people. And we've just been able to connect with so many cool people. A lot of it is personal connections, especially in the very beginning. There's this kind of network of people on the internet speaking Latin and Greek.
Yeah.
And we, through Luke Ranieri, met. And so people should look up Luke if they're interested in any of this, because he's very popular on YouTube, does a lot of spoken Latin and Greek. And he's a great guy and knows so many people, and has the ability to be friends with just about everyone. So if he's not your friend yet, he may soon be. And so he was a great hub for meeting people and bringing them on.
Well, one of the amazing things you have done is not just, you weren't satisfied with Latin and added Greek, Koine Greek. You went into Hebrew. You've even got Old English up on the website now. So this, I assume, is an extension of that network that you all have been able to amass. Yeah?
Absolutely. New St. Andrews College has been instrumental too. So our Biblical Hebrew program exists because there was a Polis student. So Polis is one of these hubs you were talking about that's in Jerusalem, where they do spoken Latin, Greek, and Hebrew, and other languages. And there was a Polis grad looking for a job, applied to New St. Andrews. They didn't have a position for him. So but they forwarded him to us. And so Tyler Foster built our Hebrew program. Old English exists because of Twitter, so, or X, whatever it's called. So good does come out of that website. I saw Colin Gorey producing Old English materials on Twitter. I signed up for a little Beowulf seminar that he was running. And he ended up building our Old English program. We published his Introduction to Old English textbook last year, Oswald Vera, which is the most delightful textbook of any kind, language or otherwise, that I think you'll ever encounter. It's a story about a bear in medieval England, and it teaches you a language. So I think that's pretty cool.
That is cool. Well, I mean, I can see it on your face, and you're promoting it, of course, on your website. But I think it's embodied in both of you, that there's a pleasure in this, right? There's a real joy in the learning, and I suspect that's a lot of what's gone into making this young business really successful. But I'd like for you to tell us, before we get off the line here, a little bit about how your business model has morphed. You said you opened in 2019, kind of a little bit of a sketch of a tutorial arrangement that you were trying to build into a business. How did it develop? And really, where do you see this going in the next couple of years?
Yeah, I think that when it started, I was just the only one teaching, and that became unsustainable pretty quickly. So the reason it's developed the way that it has is because the critics are just wrong, and people want Latin, people want Greek, people want Hebrew, and we can't. Sometimes we can't even keep up with the demand. Like we're trying to find high quality instructors all the time.
Yeah.
And so that's been one of the drivers of how we've developed and why we've had to find, all of these great colleagues of ours. So we've expanded in terms of the languages that we offer, but also in terms of the demographics that we are trying to serve. So we now have a Latin for Kids program. We are launching a Greek for high schoolers program in the fall. And we also help train teachers. Like classical schools are constantly in need of Latin teachers. Mm-hmm. This happens every single summer, where a teacher is told, "Hey, you've done a great job teaching medieval literature. We need a Latin teacher. Thanks for helping us." And so then the teacher is like, "Well, that sounds great, very interesting. I don't know Latin." And so they need to find a way to learn Latin. And so we are there to help them. So those are some of the ways in which we've developed over the years.
What do you foresee then? So this is great, by the way. I'm glad you mentioned this. If you hadn't, I would have wanted to plug you for it, because I think the schools that we're working with at Classical Commons would benefit from knowing that groups like ALI are coming alongside, willing to help them essentially train up a cadre of teachers, internal. Be a great experience professionally, just in terms of developing a cadre of teachers, that the esprit de corps around learning a language, be it Latin or Greek, but also then having that depth of bench, so that the school leader is not constantly worrying about, whoops, we just lost our Latin teacher. What are we to do? No, we've got 6 more who really are capable. They've come along. So glad to hear that you're thinking along those lines and supporting the schools. But where do you expect ALI to be in another 2 years?
Yeah, in another 2 years, I'd love to have added a language or two. That's one thing. So we have we run classes internally as well for our teachers. And so this fall, we're running a Sanskrit class. One of our teachers is a Indo-Europeanist, and so he's teaching Sanskrit to our teachers. So maybe that will be the germ of a Sanskrit program. There's some other languages that are kind of being explored actively. Yeah. That's one thing. I mean, more medium or long term, I would love to help create one of these hubs that you talked about. Like Kentucky is a hub, like Jerusalem is a hub. Mm-hmm. We need another hub in the United States, I think. And so I would love for that geographic hub to exist. And then, I mean, my really long-term goal is for the like total revaluation of values to happen in higher education, because we had one in the late 19th century and early 20th century when the classics and classical education broadly were rejected by technocrats. And I think people are sick and tired of where education has gone. And they'll point at a lot of different culprits. And most of those diagnoses are right in some way. But usually they're missing the kind of broader, both historical and philosophic vision for what went wrong. And I want that to be corrected.
Sure.
And I want to correct it.
Well, and not just to deal with the symptoms, right? I think you're right.
Yes.
I think oftentimes we're pointing to symptoms of why the educational malaise that we're currently experiencing exists. But at the root, we've lost a really deep understanding, a depth, right, of what's possible. And language study, the study of the greats and excellence are at the foundations, right, of a really sound education, which you all are helping to reestablish those very foundations. Well, go ahead, Jonathan, please.
Add in terms of like next 2 years, one of the things that that I want to see over the next few years is I want us to continue to do exactly what we're doing, just better. It's like it just needs to be better. It just needs to be better all the time. We're very happy with what we're doing, and I mean just looking at some of the texts and messages that we've received about the reception of the Latin teacher boot camp is what we call it. It's not as scary as it sounds. It's been incredible. Like the enthusiasm of the students, how much they're getting out of it. We're very happy with what we're doing, but everything on this side of fraternity can be improved. And so we want to continue to improve what we're doing.
I think that's the spirit of a classically educated individual. So keep at it, my friends. Let me just ask one final question to give you both a chance to speak to our general audience, which is made up of parents and teachers and school leaders, right? You've described how important it is for us to return to the study of the ancients, of these languages, but as living and as manifest in our communities. What kind of advice would you want to give our audience so that they can take hold of the very thing that you're promoting?
So a few things when considering how to teach a language or which program, what materials, etc. If you really want your student to be successful, the student who is most successful is the student that keeps studying. So you need to find materials or programs that are not going to go against that goal. If you give them materials that are unbelievably boring and just not suited to their age, might as well, go on a walk with them every day for an hour instead of doing something that they're just going to hate. I would rather have more people who love Latin than people who just hate it.
Sure.
That's one thing. The other thing is it's really valuable for parents to know what it is that their students are studying. Sometimes it's not uncommon where it's like parents are like, my kids are learning Latin. What is that? I don't know, but they're doing it. And it sounds pretty interesting. But I've seen, so here's a great story. There was a parent that signed up to do tutorials with me way back when, because she wanted to help her son in Latin. She's like, I want to know what's going on so I can help with the homework. And then she just continued to study. And then she got to Virgil, and then she just couldn't stop. Now, like reading, now she's just like, I need to be reading Virgil. I need to be reading Cicero and Sallust. Like this is what I do. This is like what I want to be doing, because this stuff is great. So it's worth like, if you think that it's worth your children's time, there's a chance that it's worth your time.
Worth your time. That's right. Yep. Parents lead by example. That's right. Ryan?
The thing I'd say is that the classical education movement as it exists in the United States is a grassroots movement. And so it's trying to pass on a tradition to its students that by and large was not passed on to the people leading it. And they're having to kind of start again.
Yep.
And that's in the nature of it because of this total transformation that happened 150 years ago. And so that means, for example, trying to build a successful Latin program is also going to be a grassroots effort. And so there's probably not the perfect classicist who is going to parachute in to save you. You are going to have to build that classicist, that Latin teacher, or whoever yourself, whether it's, the person who teaches integrated humanities really well and can become your Latin teacher, or it's a parent, it's the kind of parent Jonathan is talking about who's like, oh, this is cool. So yeah, it can be a bit daunting, but I really think that it's a grassroots movement, and success is going to mean cultivating those roots well.
I think that's very much in the spirit of Chesterton. You'll recall him saying that if anything's worth doing, it's worth doing poorly. Now, again, I'd add the caveat that he intended that people would get in there and get their hands dirty, right? That they would actually participate in the grassroots, in the soil, in the humus. But of course, in the case of this tradition, we do it initially, dinking around, doing our very best, but we strive, as you said a moment ago, Jonathan, for excellence. We see that high bar, and we're going to continue to reach for it year over year. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. I am so excited about what ALI is up to and the fact that you've had this remarkable growth. We're excited about partnering with you at Classical Commons, in part because we want to see more Latin boot camps taking place at schools around the country. And so we'll be working with you all in the coming days, and we'll get you back on the podcast later to find out how things are looking next spring. So I hope you'll put me on your calendar. Thanks for joining me today, and we will talk soon.
Thanks, Dr. J.
Join us weekly on the Classical Commons podcast for updates on the Renaissance in liberal education, and learn more by signing up at classicalcommons.org.